training, so you don't really want to go through, be put through another training, and you might object to it because you kind of think dog fighting is more about the dogs than people. So to try to get you to think that I'm going to use, try to show you that it does affect quite a few humans, and that show you how it has an effect on the crime rate also. Gangs, drugs, violence, death. This is only a sample of what you as law enforcement go through every day. You put your lives on the line on a daily basis to keep people like me safe. The reason I am talking to you today is because the issue of dogfighting has gone way past simply the abuse of animals. I believe that to help implement this policy, that will help to fight this issue. The reason I chose this topic is that I have a great amount of concern for the amount of crime, violence, and abuse that this issue presents, and I want communities and people to be able to prosper without being held back. So the policy I'm proposing today is to provide you with further training to better educate you on the issue of dogfighting. To do this, I will first talk to you about the harms that dogfighting proposes to society. Second, I will talk to you about my plan, using 2 different steps. Third, I will talk to you about how this plan cures all the harms associated with dogfighting. Fourth, I will talk to you about how this plan will be funded, administrated, and enforced. And last, I will talk to you about how the advantages greatly outweigh the disadvantages. It is my hope that by implementing this policy, you will better be able to respond, investigate, and enforce dogfighting to help communities and people be safe. So first off, I want to talk to you about the harms. First off, the issue of violence. And in the issue of violence, dogfighting oftentimes desensitizes children to violence. As Gibson talks about in her 2005 article, a lot of times kids are taught to like raise a puppy, take care of it, and feed it, and then after an amount of time to kill it. And this kind of shows them that, oh, it's not that bad being cruel and killing animals, and it kind of makes them think, oh, it's really not that bad. And also, according to the Anti-Cruelty Society, like oftentimes they get exposed to gangs, to drugs, to violence, and things like that, and it kind of makes the kids think that, oh, this really isn't that bad. And also in a study done by Siebert in his 2010 article, children over a 10-year period that were watched that were 6 to 12 years old were twice as likely to be violent in the future if they were violent towards animals as children. And also, just to give you an example of this, it was a case in Orlando where this news reporter reported that 2 children ages 10 and 12 were busted for dog fighting. They had somehow stolen these dogs, were fighting them, and then had killed them and buried them in their backyard when they were done. So it's just kind of a sign that it really is starting young. I mean, 10 and 12 is pretty young to be doing crime like that. And also the second issue with violence is domestic violence or abuse. And as talked about in the National Crime Prevention Council in 2007, oftentimes people who manipulate animals are more likely to manipulate people. So if they believe that they can control these animals and manipulate them, they believe that they can manipulate other people also. And those other people don't want to be manipulated. That often causes interpersonal violence. And in a study done over 7 years in 11 metropolitan areas by the Journal of Community Health in 2005, found that pet abuse was one of the top 5 factors predicting future abuse. So you can see that there's a great connection between people who abuse animals and people who abuse other people. The second issue that's associated with this is crime. The 3 big crime that goes on is gambling, drug trafficking, and gang activity. So first off, gambling. A lot of gambling goes on. A ton of money is bet. It's illegal, and also they bet possessions and they bet weapons, which oftentimes that can make it very dangerous for the people living in the surrounding community. And in drug trafficking, this is really correlated with dogfighting, because people who do dogfighting often, people who do drug trafficking go to these dogfights, and there's a lot of money flying around, so then they're able to sell their drugs. And according to Eisner in a 2008 article of the Dallas Morning News, she studied the Chicago Police Department from 2000 to 2004 and found that about 60% of animal cruelty cases were drug-related. So you can see that there's a big correlation between the two. And also gang activity. A lot of young people are becoming involved in this, in gang activity. And according to CNN, in 2007, there's about 100,000 street fighters. The street fighters are mostly the gang members that do the dog fighting, and they said that oftentimes these street fighters involve a lot of younger people. So now I've talked about the harms. I want to talk to you about my plan to train law enforcement. So it's in 2 parts, and the first part is training sheriffs at annual state sheriff's conferences. And I want to implement this in the 5 worst states where they have the weakest enforcement of dogfighting laws. And according to Thornton, those states are Idaho, Hawaii, Kentucky, Mississippi, and North Dakota. So what I want to have done is send 2 members of the ASPCA to each of these annual state sheriff's conferences in those 5 states, and have the ASPCA, the American Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, to provide this training. So this training is called Combating Dogfighting. It's a two-part curriculum. The first part talks about the issues that are associated with it, how prevalent it is, what it all involves. And the second part talks about resources to better be able to respond, investigate, and enforce dogfighting. And that's according to Moore and McNeil in their 2010 article. And I'd like to start enforcing this next year. I'm in 2012, start fresh in the new year. And by 2015, I'd like to have about 40% of the departments at least have 2 officers trained in this. And by 2020, have 100% of all departments have 2 officers trained in this. So in the second part of my plan, after the sheriffs have been trained, I want them to go back and train their officers. So you receive this training, and then you have a whole entire year to train your officers. From the time you receive the training initially as sheriffs, you have a year to train your officers until the next annual conference. And the ASPCA will check in about every 6 months, just kind of see if you have questions, concerns, or if you need any help administering the training to your officers. So now I've talked about my harms and I've talked about my plan. I want to talk to you about how this plan helps secure the harms associated with dogfighting. So first off, how it helps secure violence. If there's going to be less dogfighting, less rings off the street, there's going to be less opportunity for violence. If we take away dogfighting, we take less opportunity for people to be able to manipulate animals and to manipulate other people. And also, I believe it's going to raise more of an awareness. If more cases start to come out and people start to see the link between animal cruelty and violence, I think people may want to get involved and do things to help out and help stop it. And how it solves crime, like I said before, the association with drugs and dogfighting is very great. So if we're going to take out the dogfighting, we're going to be taking out the drug trafficking also, which I know for law enforcement is a big deal in the world of crime today. And also, by knowing better what to look for in a dogfight investigation, knowing the signs of animal abuse, knowing what different tools they use, law enforcement will be able to obtain dogfighting search warrants. And if you're able to obtain these search warrants and go in and search for dogfighting, you find other crimes associated with it, then you can charge them for that. So instead of having a separate investigation for all these other crimes, by obtaining a dogfighting search warrant, you can find all those other crimes within that. So now I've talked to you about the harms, about my plan and how it cures it. I want to talk to you about how it's going to be funded, administrated, and enforced. So first off, the funding. The ASPCA is going to provide all the funding. You just have to go to the conferences, get the training, then go back and train your officers. The ASPCA will provide the funding. In the administration, the ASPCA will mainly oversee it. They'll be the ones training you, seeing if you need help. But the Department of Justice will be there as a backup. So for the enforcement, when you arrive at these conferences, you can sign in a sheet, tell which department you're from, just so the ASPCA can kind of keep track of who's attending. And then the Department of Justice will only be enforced if you don't meet the requirements. If by 2015 you don't have 40% having 2 officers trained, or by 2020 you don't have 100% having 2 officers trained. And we try to give enough time to make sure, because there's a lot of other trainings I know as law enforcement has to go through, so try to give you enough time to be able to accomplish that so the Department of Justice doesn't have to be involved. So last today, now I've talked to you about the harms, about my plan, how it's going to be administrated and enforced, and how it cures it. I want to talk to you about some of the advantages and disadvantages to my plan. So first off, the disadvantages. I think it's going to be more costly initially because we're going to be busting a lot more people for dogfighting and other related drugs. So maybe more costly initially to have to prosecute them and take them into custody. But I do believe in the long run that less and less people are going to be doing it, so it's going to be less of a cost. And also, as law enforcement, you already have a lot to deal with. You do a lot of trainings, do a lot of things already. So it is going to be, more training you have to go through, but I really, really believe it's going to help stop violence between people, and it's going to make communities a lot safer. And some of the advantages, I really don't think that you'll have a lot more calls. I think more you're just going to be finding dogfighting where otherwise you wouldn't. You may get called in for a domestic abuse call, and if you know what to look for in a dogfighting case, you may discover dogfighting when you go for that domestic abuse call. And also, I believe the crime rate is going to be down also. You're going to take out this dogfighting and all the crime associated with it. You're going to have, the crime rate is going to be down, and people in communities are going to be safer. So before leaving you today, I want to say once again how much as law enforcement you do for us. By receiving this training, I believe you'll become a much stronger and more efficient force. Today, I talked to you about my policy and all that it entails. First, I talked to you about the harms that it poses to society. Second, I talked to you specifically about my policy and how you would implement it. Third, I talked to you about how this policy cures all the harms associated with dogfighting. Next, I talked about how it would be funded, administrated, and enforced. And lastly, I talked about how the advantages greatly outweigh the disadvantages. So I hope after today, you understand why you are crucial to implementing this policy. And I believe that having you involved in this policy will help bring the terrible world of dogfighting to an end.